Well, the motion to refer the Prime Minister to the Privileged Committee revolves around two words, Madam Deputy Speaker. Pressure, that's the first word, and it's absolutely vital. Also, process. And, of course, the Prime Minister is the master of process. He bangs on about it all the time. The king of process here in the Commons. And he says that full due process was followed, and yet we've already heard from other honourable members that Sir Simon Case, the then Cabinet Secretary, gave the Prime Minister in November 2024 due process. He said that actually the vetting and the due diligence should be carried out before confirming the choice of ambassador. The Prime Minister chose to avoid that due process. There is a second key element of due process that I don't think has been properly teased out so far this afternoon, and that is with regard to the timing of the decision on vetting through January 2025. Because if full due process was being followed, then the security authorities, the vetting authorities, should have been allowed to take whatever time they deemed necessary to make their judgment. And with regard to Mandelson, goodness me, there's a lot to go through to check that clearance. Clearly, we've heard from a number of senior civil servants that actually they were not allowed to carry out full due process and to take as long as they determined was necessary, even if that took them beyond the inauguration of the President of the United States. No, I bring you on now, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the second word, which is whether or not any pressure whatsoever was applied. And we've heard from not one, not two, but from three separate senior civil servants that actually the pressure was not on the decision itself, the pressure was indeed on the speed of the decision, because the decision had already been taken by not following due process. And we have heard Sir Ollie Robbins confirm that pressure was felt to get on with the decision. We've heard yesterday from Ian Collard that actually pressure was applied to make that decision. And we've heard, of course, from Sir Philip Barton that actually, again, he said the pressure was to get on with it. There was no space in the decision. There was no space in that. In other words, due process was not followed. And it was all about, I will happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
If I give way. Did we not hear last week at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee that whilst there was pressure, and that was discussed, it had no impact on the decision, and it was a marginal decision, and they felt that the risks could be managed. I feel that the honourable gentleman is missing this part out in his story.
I think the honourable gentleman, but I would remind him what the Prime Minister said at Prime Minister's questions just last week. No pressure existed whatsoever. Whatsoever is the critical word, which is the flaw in the honourable member's argument. So we now know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that not only actually did the Prime Minister inadvertently mislead the House with regard to full due process, but he has misled the House for a second time with regard to whether or not any pressure existed whatsoever. Madam Deputy Speaker, the evidence is in. And for a Prime Minister that prides himself on process, anecdotally, it seems that there is a culture that does not exist around him and within him and perhaps himself. For example, we now know that the Cabinet Office questioned whether or not there should be any vetting at all. In other words, they didn't want full due process, so we know that. And we now know that Sir Ollie Robbins, in terms of the decision whether or not to retain him or fire him, clearly full due process was not followed. And then the issue of whether or not this decision to refer any member of the House to the Privileges Committee, precedent clearly shows that it should not be whipped. And I would argue, Madam Deputy Speaker, that precedent is a process. And the process of not whipping this decision, this vote, is not in this instance, Madam Deputy Speaker, being followed. So I would urge all honourable members to ignore the whipping, to follow the conscience and to follow the evidence. The evidence is in, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister inadvertently misled the House of Commons.
David Pinto-Duchinsky.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Appointing Peter Mandelson was wrong. And as with any debate on this subject, we should start by acknowledging the suffering of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. They have my full solidarity. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have listened closely to the opposition during this debate, and I think we need to call their behaviour for what it is. This is political game playing of the lowest order from the party opposite. Politics is a circus to them. They thrive off this use of politics as a soap opera because it is all they know. That's why the public grew so heartily sick of them, and it is precisely why so many of their former colleagues no longer sit on their benches. Just weeks ago, their leader showed a catastrophic failure of leadership in calling for this country to rush to war. When she spoke then, she had no underlying strategy and she didn't focus on what was right for the country. Clearly, she has learnt nothing from that. Her cynicism becomes clear now when we peel back their rhetoric and expose the lack of substance behind her arguments. Peter Mandelson was dismissed last September. Rightly so. The Prime Minister has already acknowledged that his appointment was a mistake. Senior civil servants, including Ollie Robbins, Chris Wormholt and Cat Little, have all made clear that due process was followed in that appointment. Ollie Robbins himself has said that no one from Number 10 ever spoke to him or messaged him to apply pressure. And Philip Barton today also confirmed that there was no pressure on the substance of the vetting. I also want to deal directly with this point about the sequence of vetting. I have been through developed vetting. I've been through security vetting numerous times. It is completely standard procedure to make offers of jobs contingent on passing security. On this point, as on other points, there is simply no case to answer. What's more, this government is undertaking an extensive release of documents. Now I'm making some progress. In the interest of transparency and respect for this House, ministers have updated us on that progress with the humble address. And on top of that, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee is holding hearings. What's more, alongside that, the government has strengthened already the processes around national security vetting and senior appointments. So I ask again, what's the real substance here? We are not uncovering new facts. In fact, the opposition's argument has changed time and time again, as the member for Cardiff West so eloquently pointed out. What we are seeing is lots of throwing mud in the hope that some of it will stick. The party opposite is not speaking in the public interest, but in service of political opportunism. It is demeaning and diminishing an important parliamentary process. Our disciplinary processes are serious. They should not be used for political point scoring. A privileges investigation would not bring further clarity. It would only create a long, costly and wholly unnecessary duplication of processes that are either completed or already underway. It is a distraction, and I'm guessing that's why the party opposite wants it, a stunt, and that's why I will be voting against it.